Hello, everyone, and welcome to House, the Shared Living podcast. This is episode 11 in our 6th season, and we're back again for another week of the latest news, views, and insights from the rented shared living sectors. That is PBSA, BTR, co-living, university accommodation, HMO, and the rented later living sectors. So if this is where you work, you are in the right place for the next hour or so. I'm Dan Smith from Resi Consultancy and VerbaFlow AI.
I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And I'm Deanie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And let's now hear from our headline sponsors, My Student Halls.
Housed is sponsored by Spotlight Boost on mystudenthalls.com. Use Spotlight Boost to stand out in search results and drive more leads to your properties.
We're delighted Dan and the team from My Student Halls have decided to be our headline sponsors once again. They are a key part of the student accommodation marketing cycle and really good partners to us at Housed. So thanks very much to Dan and the team. Also, a huge thank you to Wash Station, Utopia and Howden. More from them a little bit later. So, Sarah, Deanie, what have we been up to this week?
I think we'll let you have the headlines for this one, Dan, because I think your achievement from last week is probably more significant than ours. So over to you.
So VerbaFlow closed a $7 million fundraise, which I am delighted about. It's been a lot of hard work in the background by VP and Shantan in particular, who have, basically helped us to get the funds on board to enable us to scale and grow. Obviously, we've done quite a good job so far of taking it to market with 230,000 beds using it, but this will certainly help to scale it beyond. So really good week for us at VerbaFlow. So many demos on an ongoing basis, but this was something new and obviously really exciting from our side of things. If I sound slightly jaded, it's because we did celebrate a little bit over the weekend, Em and I, obviously the rest of the team being all over the world. And also we hired Tim Stephen. So, of course, Amber going into administration was, really sad news, but the positive out of it is that Tim Stephen became available, and we've been looking for someone who can oversee Europe in particular from a BTR student housing perspective and really take it to market. And Tim becoming available, shall I diplomatically say, it just meant that we jumped straight at it. And so I called him within sort of half an hour of hearing the news. I was actually on a demo at the time of VerbaFlow when I got a message about Amber. And by the end of our conversation, we'd sort of realised that there was definitely an opportunity there. So Tim joins VerbaFlow as head of Europe for real estate, and will be hopefully alleviating some of my workload in particular, because I can't do. There's only so many hours in the day that I can do demos. But really great to have him on board. He's well loved within the industry, and more than that, he is an exceptional business development person. I'm really excited to have him on board.
Firstly, congratulations all around, Dan, on the funding, obviously on getting Tim, and also to Tim. So sounds like a good week all round.
It certainly was, but as I said, it was a funny week. I know in trying to prep for the podcast, we were kind of like, well, hang on a minute, we've done a couple of these already, these topics. Are we going to just go round and round in circles? We do need to make sure that we're bringing fresh topics to people. So we put it out there to a few people to say, what do you want to hear about? What do you want us to talk about? What's the burning issue within the industry? Because I think it's not that busy in either, BTR is relatively static, and co-living as well at the moment. Student housing, it's just about to pick up, peak season's on the way. Single family housing, seeing a lot of interest in that, and later living too. But we just wanted to open things up a little bit. But before we get on to some of the topics that you guys have suggested to us, I want to give you two an opportunity to talk about the Youth Forum. Obviously, it looks at one of the most critical parts of student living in particular, move-in. So do you want to just talk through some of the key takeaways that came out of the Youth Forum, and maybe give us a bit of background as to what it is, and obviously who sponsored it as well?
So last week we launched our new Youth Forum. For those of you who don't know about the Youth Forum, it's our kind of pulse survey to your customers across the sector, and we ask the questions about what impacts their living experience, whether that's cost, whether that's sustainability, whether that's community. The latest one that we issued was all around that move-in experience. And as you say, Dan, we do partner with Student Crowd on this, and we also have two wonderful sponsors in Utopia and Homes for Student. So thank you to those, because it means that we can share it for free. So if you haven't downloaded the report, please make sure you go onto our website and find it and download it, because there's always loads of great information in it, and this report is no different. So please do go and download it. As I say, we kind of asked key questions. We do both a survey and a focus group, and we asked key questions about how people's move-in experiences was when they first moved into their accommodation. And I can say that the sector needs to give themselves a big pat on the back, because overall it was a really, really positive experience for those that we surveyed. And I think 60% felt really positive about moving in. I think it was 85%, Sarah, I'm going to come to you, that kind of said it was a good experience.
86% said they were satisfied with their move-in experience. So that takes in kind of the different sort of positive categories. We launch all of our youth forums with a webinar, and we talk about it with the sponsors and with special guests for an hour, basically. And I think when we saw the results, we were like, oh God, what are we going to talk about for an hour at a webinar? Because usually we have a lot more meat to dig into. But if the sector is so satisfied, what are we going to talk about? But actually, it was really interesting. And to Nicola Rowland-Boone's point from Homes for Students, if 86% of students are satisfied, that's still 14% that aren't. So there's still room for improvement across the sector. And I guess just to clarify, those kind of initial impressions weren't just about moving. It was about those kind of the first initial weeks when Gen Z move into their new homes, first weeks and months. One thing that did strike me, though, and we did reflect on it a little bit, because Mike Coxon from Student Crowd was able to bring some data about those key things that kind of are appearing in reviews, is I'm not sure that as a sector we're preparing young people enough for moving in and living with people. And it seemed like quite a lot of the negative reviews that Mike talked about from Student Crowd are really to do with that adjustment to living with maybe 6 or 8 other people in a flat. And I think that's really interesting. And that's actually something that is a key takeaway that the sector can grab hold of and maybe do something about. And, you know, I guess prepare people. Communication was another thing that came up in the survey, actually. So when you're communicating with people, maybe you want to prepare them for living with other people. Maybe you want to talk about what to bring. Maybe you want to talk about parking when you check in, all of those things. It was really, really spread. And it seems like that, don't know, fortunately, unfortunately, didn't really give the sector one clear communication channel that all of Gen Z are using. It's actually all of them. You need to be everywhere, because some prefer emails, some prefer an app, some prefer social media, etc. So that was quite interesting as well. Deanie, have we missed anything else out? Or actually, we should just say, go to our website, The Property Marketing Strategist, and download the report, and go to our YouTube channel as well, because we take a lot of time talking to students and doing the focus groups, and it would be really great if people watch them. We know that people have used the sound bites in presentations, in internal training, etc. So we'd love them to be used.
And just to add, I think that overwhelmingly what came across, which isn't a massive surprise, is that this isn't about buildings. It's not buildings that make that move-in experience. It's people that make that move experience. And all those things about preparation, being welcoming, being supportive, all adds massive value to that process, I think. And that came across loud and clear with those stats.
I think people do beat the products, and we do need to, in an era of AI, we do need to focus on that community management and making sure that your welcome is very much from that community manager, whether it be, you know, a general manager or someone on site. I think that's going to be really, really important. Everyone's going to be desperate for a personal experience and that sense of community, because everything else is pretty much going to be automated. All of that communication beforehand, I think, is a lot of that is going to be automated. How much do you think that roommate matching is playing an important role in that? Because it's not something I'm seeing a huge amount of in you know, anywhere. And I'm talking about the UK and Europe here. In the US, there are roommate matching apps within each of the PMS, or at least modules within each of the PMS. And I know that there are for some of them over here too in the UK, but there's also separate apps, and there's a real focus on making sure that you manage that community before they've even checked in. So it's going through a longer process of checking their suitability to live with other people, whether it, I think we've taken quite a basic approach in student accommodation in the UK to, is this person an undergrad? Is this person a postgrad? Are they going to get on? Is the postgrad going to want to study, and then the undergrad going to want to party? In which case, you're going to see a lot of problems. And then also from a cultural perspective, matching Indian students with Chinese students, with British students, with whatever else. So it is an interesting one. But yeah, to what extent does that play a role within the satisfaction of anyone moving in?
I think it comes back a little bit to what I said just before about preparing people for living with other people. And I think even if they were to choose the type of people that they want to live with, I still think it's hard living with a number of other people. So I think that roommate matching would help with some of that, because you're immediately, I guess, negating some of the challenges if you're living with people with the same values as you. I'm not talking about the same culture or the same nationality or the same age even. I'm really talking about values-led roommate matching, flatmate matching. But even if you lived with 6 like-minded people, I still think that could be a massive shock to the system. There are some young people who have only ever lived with one other adult their whole life. There are obviously care estranged students as well. And all of these is really difficult. You've got people that know how to do washing up and clean themselves. There are people that have never had to share a bathroom before. There's so many different things that come into it. And I think we're very quick as a sector to just rush and put all of these people together and just expect them to get on with it. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a parent of teenagers. We have quite a busy house. There's 5 of us here. 3 of the kids share the bathroom. Maybe they would adjust a little bit better, but I can certainly see how different backgrounds can make that initial moving in experience and beyond really quite challenging.
And I was just going to say that on the roommate matching, I think it's used minimally in the UK from what I can see. And if I'm wrong on that, then by all means, please tell me who's using it and how successful it's being. And we've spoken to lots of providers about the options of it. And I think there's still a view in the UK that it's part of the experience that you've got to learn to live with people that might not be like-minded, and that's part of life. And I can see that and I can understand that. But equally, even if on paper you're deemed to match someone, doesn't mean that you're going to get on. So I think you still learn those lessons, and you learn those lessons as part of being the wider community. It doesn't have to be just about who you live with in a flat or apartment. So I think there's definitely more scope to test that roommate matching and see what impact it does. But as Sarah said, that's not going to be the answer to it. I think there is still that process of knowledge, giving people knowledge, because the biggest thing that causes anxiety and fear is the unknown. So you've got to try and resettle that unknown. And I think that's one of the emotions that came out, not massively high, but that kind of sense of overwhelm. And I think we are in a society where, and similar to the communication view, is that actually you've got to spread that communication out across all these different channels, because so many of your customers are on different channels, but you've got to do it in bite-sized chunks so you don't overwhelm people, so it doesn't become, you're sending me so much stuff, I don't know how to cope with it. And that's where, we're big believers that you need to have good communicators working in operators to do this for you. And I still don't think we've got enough of that. We've not got enough dedicated communicators to help with that.
I also think that I don't know if we're all talking the same language when it comes to roommate matching, because I'm sure you saw a lot in America, Dan, and we know of a couple of roommate matching technologists who are having great success in America. And it's about it's psychometric testing, really. It's about matching people in a much more clever, sophisticated way than I think we have seen in the UK. I think maybe when people talk about roommate matching, they think that we're just saying, do you like to study? Do you like sport? Do you go to bed early? Do you smoke? No, we shouldn't be talking at those levels anymore. I think, it needs to be far more smarter. And I do agree that people need to learn tolerance and resilience, but I also don't think we should be deliberately setting people up to fail and to be anxious when we don't have to, because there is technology that will do that for operators and for universities.
I agree. And I think we talked about it last week. Everyone's looking to find their tribe, aren't they? And I think whether that be that you're really open to, new cultures and new experiences and people from all over the world, or whether you just want to, meet a few locals and a few people from the country that you're from, or whatever it might be. I think we've got that opportunity to be able to offer that to residents. Like I said, I've seen it in the US. What we'll have now is we'll have all the PMSs reaching out saying, we've got this capability, people just aren't really using it. And we'll have a few operators saying, we do it, we're absolutely nailing it. But I think that the majority of operators don't do anywhere near enough of it. It's more left to the general managers, and I think that the whole process could be automated, like you said, Sarah, with more kind of psychometric testing, but without overwhelming people. And interesting that you talk about the communication point of view. I think we're in danger of just providing just completely overwhelming people with the amount that they have to think about before they check in. So there's definitely some work that has to be done there. But again, it's the kind of thing that I think AI will help with, because it will be more residents asking questions, and then they'll just get the exact answer that they want back, rather than having to read through reams and reams and reams of policies. So yeah, I think it's really interesting piece. It's a brilliant report. So do go and download the Youth Forum report on the Property Marketing Strategist's website. It's available several times a year with different topics each time. So well worth a read. Keeps you up to speed on what's happening in the sector. And now let's have a quick word from Utopia.
Utopia is the trusted partner for high-performance asset management, cutting energy costs, reducing risk, and delivering proven ESG results.
With billions of data points and 75,000 rooms monitored, Utopia turns real-time intelligence into measurable value, protecting investments and driving continuous improvement.
Choose intelligence that delivers. Choose Utopia.
Thanks very much to Utopia for sponsoring this season of the podcast. Really grateful to have you on board for UK Reef as well. There's a really interesting panel on sustainability there. In a Trump world, does sustainability, DEI, and social impact really matter? That is the topic. So we're very keen to make sure that we talk about sustainability in the right way, and I think Utopia do a great job of framing that. It's not just about sustainability and environmental and social impact. It is also about asset management. And I think that's really important to take forward. So thanks very much to Utopia for joining us. Now, this is one of the topics that we had sent to us because we put it out there. It was a bit of a slow news week, as I've mentioned, in shared living, and a few people wrote back and said development viability, and the fact that we've kind of skirted around it a little bit. But what does it actually mean? Like, why are we finding it so difficult to build PBSA or BTR in particular, and potentially what can be done about it? So I'll go through a few of the things that I know of, and then I think if we just sort of use those as talking points to then start working out what can be done realistically. But across the board, development is difficult, and I think the planning regime is very much at the heart of this. There's some incredibly onerous requirements, and there's planning complexity across the board, and that can involve various different elements of that. So a lot of local authorities, when it comes to PBSA in particular, they are now seeking affordable PBSA contributions. London in particular has mandated this, but others are seeking that as well. So they're built in as conditions of consent, and there's no nationally consistent approach to PBSA there. So often there's deal-breaking demands for affordability and specific rooms at specific prices for certain universities, and getting universities on board. That is definitely a real challenge. And then you throw in the likes of the Community Infrastructure Levy, which is SIL, as everybody calls it, and Section 106. They add material cost to every single scheme. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be there. I do think that all large projects should be contributing to the local community, whether that be sorting the roads out or local community projects or whatever it might be. But I do think that is becoming again slightly onerous. PBSA is falling foul of this because it's frequently treated as sui generis use, which means that SIL rates can be applied, and they're typically quite inconsistent and quite punishing. And I think with Section 106 contributions, it just undermines the scheme viability across the board. So we've got some issues issues there when it comes to planning. Then you throw in the likes of a new developer levy, which is from October 26. That's a levy on residential and PBSA developments. So that's going to come in fairly soon for anything over 30 bed spaces. So that's a lot, and I do think that will add another layer of cost uncertainty. It's just, I think that's one of the key problems that we have. It's that uncertainty across the board. Developers and investors, they like consistency and they like certainty, and we are not giving them any of that through planning. And then we're throwing in, the extra levies, and now you think about the building safety regulator as well, and all of the delays that are thrown in there, Gateway 2 delays in particular. So anything over 18 meters, subject to higher risk building regime, and that needs Gateway 2 approval. But it's been thrown in there by the government and by the previous government in post Grenfell. This, of course, is, and we understand that there needs to be a building safety regulator. Of course, we need to learn the lessons from Grenfell. But as we say time after time, this feels like a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and it hasn't been properly resourced, and it hasn't used tech well enough. And I know that those processes have put months, sometimes even well over a year. We've had one person reached out to us and said they've been waiting 18 months for Gateway 2 approval, and that is completely slowing everything down. So whilst I do understand the need for it, it is just prohibitive right now. And then beyond those gateway delays, the cost of that compliance, the new building, the fire safety and structural assessments, all of the obligations for the sort of principal designer and contractor, and then the golden thread documentation, it is just material increases across the board. Combine that with labour increases, Brexit, and cost inflation. Build costs are absolutely through the roof. So it's it is really difficult to get spades in the ground and get things built. And this isn't just the UK. Like these may sound like they're specifically limited to the UK. It's not. It is difficult to build across Europe, across the US, and some of it is cost of capital and cost of build, and some of it is some of the other barriers that we're putting in the way. So yeah, Sarah, Deanie, I mean, how do we change the momentum here? Is this a temporary squeeze, or is this a structural shift? Is there anything that we can do apart from lobbying the government? And is there any likely change? I don't know what your thoughts are on how we can actually get Britain built.
As you were going through that list, what I thought, and I don't have the answer, is I wonder if all of these policies are considered or brought to life by the same department, because I doubt they are. And I think that probably is what the problem is, that there's different departments in government looking at different parts of it, and it's not joined up. So, does the housing minister even know that all of this is impacting? Because the housing department may only be responsible for 3 out of 7 of those things that you just discussed, Dad. So I don't know the answer, but I do wonder if that's what it is that there needs to be some kind of reform to bring all of those people, all of those stakeholders together to try and streamline it. You've obviously got, planning, and then you've got affordable housing requirements, and then you've got Section 106, and then you've got building safety. And then you've got new developer levy, which feels like it might go into some kind of tax department. So I'm not sure that they're all the same thing, really. There will be quite a lot of ministers, I believe, at UK Reef. And obviously, if we can get any of them onto our summit panels, we will do. But yeah, it feels fragmented, would be my observation.
I think it is, like you say, Dan, I think all of these things are coming from a positive place in how we want our buildings to be built, and I guess how we want to support the communities that they're built in. But it feels, as you say, Sarah, it is fragmented. There's no one looking at the whole picture and going, well, what's the impact of all this? And B, it just feels this would all be great if we were probably in better economic times when it was able to be managed, and it's not, and it's all just come at the wrong time. And I think with the global situation as it is now, that time's not getting any better. So in your initial question about is it kind of a temporary squeeze or is it a structural change? I think it's both, but that temporary squeeze is not a squeeze. It's kind of cutting off the lifeline of it, really. And that's the problem, is that it kind of, we need government to understand what the impact of all this is, because it's not achieving what they want either, presumably. If actually they want is growth and house building, it's not even achieving that. So it does come back down to the government need to listen, but the government are looking in a million other different directions because everything's a little bit broken.
It is, and it is, Sarah, you're right, it's fragmented. And I think that from a local council to national government and the policymakers, there's not enough communication there. And obviously there's political agendas for local councils too. And that makes things a lot more challenging when it comes to decision making. And we know the government loves decision by committee, especially this government. And at a time when you want to be building 1.5 million homes, to firstly not even be considering really rental housing as a viable option, and folding that into the strategy in the way that we want to, because the way the government seem to be approaching this from a house builder's perspective, let's build some more houses. Well, houses come in all shapes and sizes, and I think that's where BTR, co-living, PBSA all need to be considered, single family housing. And I just don't think they are in a viable way at the moment. And at a time when we want to be building 1.5 million homes, we're putting so many barriers in the way of actually building those homes. And I think that's where we need root and branch review of planning reform. We need much more support, more technology, more streamlining for the building safety regulator. And we have to make sure that we're not putting all of these barriers in the way. I think that, developers need to contribute to solving the affordability crisis, because I don't think it's a housing supply crisis. I think it's an affordability crisis. And I think that having more homes will just bring down the cost of homes and bring down the cost of rents, which of course will make things more. But I think that overall the government are not willing to do any root and branch review. They're tinkering around the edges, 300 extra people in planning, etc. And that's my frustration. I just can't see any solution at the moment with the current government without any joined up thinking. And that may be unpopular with them, and we may not get the right people now at UK Reef to the Shared Living Summit, because we're being not controversial, but we're quite happy to talk openly and transparently about our frustrations with planning, with the lack of support and the lack of incentives and the lack of tax breaks, etc. All of that needs to be factored in. So, yeah, it's just, there were a few people that sent us that as something to talk about. And I just want to put out there again, we just don't have the answers without further government interaction. And that, again, hopefully is where the ARL, Association for Rental Living, and the and UK RE, Real Estate UK, RE UK, the new body that the BPF is behind. I think they just need to do a louder job of getting the ear of the right people. I think that's the frustration that we've got. I think we'll be talking about this for a long time. So we'll move on now to our next topic, but not before we've heard from Wash Station.
Wash Station proudly sponsor this episode of Housed. We provide best-in-class laundry solutions that complement your buildings. Wash Station. Smart, green, clean.
Thanks very much to Wash Station. Do reach out to John and the team if you have any laundry requirements, whether you've got one that needs a new quote, or you've got a development, if you're one of the lucky few that is actually able to develop from scratch. But do reach out to John and the team at Wash Station for all of your laundry needs. Now, the next topic is about PBSA, and this is about international students and the sort of seeming demand drop at the moment. Now, I was on the Enrollee webinar the other day. Enrollee, for those of you that don't know, is an international applications body. They deal with all of the applications for a lot of universities, in particular, a few Russell Group universities, but also a lot of the Tier 2 universities as well. And, think of them almost like a UCAS, but it's a private body. And they do a lot of reports, and they do a lot of really sort of transparent and open webinars. And most recently, their latest webinar talked about the fact that CAS issuance is down by 27%. A CAS certificate is effectively your confirmation of acceptance for studies. Every university needs to offer this to a student to enable them to get a student visa. What we've seen more recently is the government really cracking down on that. And by cracking down on that, I mean that you had a lot of students from certain nationalities in particular, but also just across the board, who weren't necessarily genuine and were getting their student visa and then very quickly either claiming asylum or just weren't turning up to university. And so that's why we've seen 4 nationalities banned from studying in the UK more recently. That's Afghanistan and Sudan. I think it was Cameroon and Myanmar. So that is quite a big statement from the government that they're going to come down really hard on students that aren't genuine. But the knock-on effect of that is universities are petrified about losing their CAS license and the ability to be able to take international students. So I don't know what you both think, but I'm hoping that we're going to catch up, that we're not going to see this 27% drop in international students, that it will catch up, and that this is universities just being a bit stricter about the processes that they go through for students to actually receive their confirmation of acceptance. So I don't know what your thoughts are on it, Sarah Deeney.
I think it's a really difficult time, as we know, for universities. I don't think we know what's going to happen. I don't know how anyone can know what's going to happen. We can hope that it's going to pick up, but as I say, there's a big global situation going on, which is going to impact all of this as well. So it's just, we've got to, as ever, I think the PBSA sector has to really think about where we are, where customers are certainty, and to make sure that we are serving those customers that are here, that we know are going to be here, and making it as relevant for them as possible. Because I think we just don't know when it comes to this, whether this is going to be a 27% dip or not.
Yeah, I think that's what I was reflecting on. And we cover this when we do marketing audits and marketing strategies. And I think generally speaking, we would always recommend a domestic first strategy. Really, they're the students that are going to be here. Those numbers are not fluctuating hugely, with the caveat that we know a lot are considering whether to commute to a university closer to home than travel. But the numbers of domestic students overall, the numbers of 18-year-olds going to university aren't changing hugely in this country. But strategically, the product, the price aren't necessarily geared up for that domestic student. So you can't just pivot to marketing to a domestic student if the product and the price isn't right for a domestic student, which is why I think over the last 2 cycles, we've really seen operators waiting for that magical influx of international students that just hasn't come. And they really need to learn from that, that behaviour. There's nothing in this data or any other data that is, I guess, positively indicating that international students will see a massive increase, particularly in those postgraduate numbers. So I don't know why people think that magically they're going to appear from somewhere. There's nothing indicating that they will.
I do think we'll catch up. I do think, yes, 27% behind sounds pretty scary, but I do think most of that will catch up. I don't think postgrads will. I think, where we say that, we can rely on domestic student numbers. Yes, we can, but not with postgrads. And we certainly can't rely on international postgrads. The international numbers haven't looked too bad in terms of, acceptances and applications. And so I think we're kind of doing okay there. But geopolitically, there's a lot of challenges that are being thrown in at the moment. We were just discussing what do we call what's happening in Iran at the moment. So the global situation, but realistically, the sort of Israeli-American war with Iran is going to be a major challenge, I think. But hopefully, it will be limited in terms of the impact it has on international student recruitment. You would hope so anyway. I think immigration has more of a part to play there, and sort of right-leaning governments, as it were, and that's something we have to contend with in the UK as they do in the US, as they do in Europe. So it's going to be an interesting one to see how the year closes out. But like you said, Sarah, focus on those domestic students, but you have to just get your pricing right. We're still heading towards cashbacks at the end of the year. I don't think that international student demand will recover and go beyond where people were expecting it to be, or at least beyond last year. But the interesting thing is, I don't hear anyone shouting about real occupancy challenges at the moment, or being like really behind. I think London is going through a rough patch at the minute. We are getting a few operators reach out to us and say, what's going on in London? We seem to be behind, or we were behind last year. So maybe it is that either student accommodation operators are not particularly worried, and BTR operators, I should say. There are many out there that are reaching out to say, look, what's going on with the students? Can you talk to us? But either they're relatively comfortable and they think those numbers are going to come through, and that they're not more than 10% behind year on year, or potentially the news has got through that it's actually tougher to fill, and that it's not shocking anymore to be behind on occupancy, and that the investors are actually starting to listen. We all get a lot of messages from operators saying, really great to hear what you're talking about on the podcast, because a lot of these investors need to understand that it is not as easy as it was a year or even 3 years ago. I think that's one of the key things that we just need to be slightly mindful of. So yeah, be interested to see, but do go and check out the enrollee data. Do check out their webinars. Well worth signing up for those each time that they come out, because it's such a unique insight, and I think we could all learn a lot from it. It's fairly real time data. It's as if you're getting HESA data in relatively real time. So do go and have a look at some of those webinars. So now let's hear from Howden.
Howden is the 5th largest employee-owned business in the UK and one of the largest insurance groups globally. With over 60 years' experience, Howden's specialist education division delivers tailored insurance, risk management and wellbeing solutions for the education sector.
They're the trusted partner of nearly 1,000 schools, colleges, universities and student accommodation providers across the UK.
Howden helps owners and operators protect what matters most, and so they are the perfect sponsors for Housed. Thank you for coming on board for Season 6.
Thank you very much to Howden for sponsoring the podcast. It's been great to have you with us this season. For any insurance need across student housing, or also across the entire real estate sector, do reach out to Howden, and they will certainly be able to point you in the right direction. And our last topic is Iran to a certain extent, but it's more energy. What we want to cover is, where are we at with regards to energy at the moment? Of course, there's a lot of headlines with Iran and the pricing at the moment. On a personal level, I have an oil boiler, so luckily I filled up just before all of these issues in Iran did kick off. But I know that there's a lot of other student accommodation, BTR and co-living operators slightly concerned with contract renewals coming up, and obviously with what happened with Amber going into administration. Because who knows, some of these contracts, we just don't know exactly how all of these contracts are set up. It sounds like most of them are with Total Energies, and hopefully they've been novated, or whether they're, because Amber were a broker, there shouldn't be too much of a problem there. But there will be some that fall foul of that and do have to come up for renewal. So I'm just wondering, are we actually getting smarter with some of this procurement, or are we still just beholden to the brokers, the big energy companies, and is there a better way to sort of prioritize that certainty? Because it's so volatile at the moment, and energy can be anything up to sort of 60% of your costs. It's going to have a real big impact on your NOI. So yeah, I'm just wondering if there's anything more that can be done to without just purely talking about hedging, but anything more that can be done to do a better job of managing energy within the sector. Don't know. What did you think, Sarah?
I don't feel qualified enough to talk about it, to be honest. But what I guess what I would say is, obviously we're in March now. Probably in another 6 months, we'll be looking at rent setting for the following year. If you're in PBSA, obviously, if you're in BTR or co-living, you're rent setting and adjusting constantly. And that's going to be really, really difficult to kind of predict the future and how that might impact rents without pushing the rents up so high when you've got inclusive bills. That's then going to cause a occupancy problem, further down the line. So yeah, I don't feel qualified to talk about it other than making sure that operators really give themselves enough time in this rent setting process to really consider it, do the research, talk to the experts, because we know that sometimes it's a really rushed process, and at this particular point in time, it needs to not be rushed, and there's no constants really, there's no reference points. So yeah, it needs to be considered really, really carefully to not completely discombobulate other parts of the rent setting and occupancy data really.
And just also is management, I guess, in terms of usage, is that we need to think about it now before we get further down into this situation, and how we can, I guess, it's not just about telling residents to use less, it's about encouraging them to do that and rewarding them for doing that. So actually those savings are shared. And I think that's not, as Sarah said, that isn't something you can just flick a switch and make that happen. That takes time. So taking that consideration in as well. And that's not just people living in BTR, PBSA, co-living. That's everyone's going to need to be doing that, because it's going to affect everyone.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with all-inclusive utilities. I'm concerned for the NOI this year. I think there's going to be a few that fall foul of it, with contracts up for renewal and the massive spike in prices that we're seeing. I think it will be similar as to when the Ukraine war kicked off and Russia invaded Ukraine. I think that is we're in a similar place. Not quite such a spike yet. I don't know. There's just no plan and there's no end in sight at the moment. So it is a bit of a concern. I think the good news for anyone out of amber is that, yes, I think that there will be a lot of real estate operators looking at their energy management. And I don't think that a lot of that can be automated at the moment. I think that contracting has to be done incredibly carefully by people in the know. And so hopefully there will be some internal roles, or possibly some new consultancies or companies that come out of that, because everybody needs that help right now. It is a massive NOI risk. And I think at a time where the occupancy isn't guaranteed and the revenue's certainly not guaranteed, because everybody is having to become more competitive in all of these sectors, I do think that is going to be a challenge to have the NOI hit as well. So we'll have to wait and see on this. We'll keep everyone abreast of any specific measures that can be put in place. Obviously, reach out to Utopia. I think if you're looking at guarding your NOI and you're looking at sustainability measures. And, I think we need to be looking more at on-site power generation, and to make sure that we do become fairly self-sufficient. But that's really tricky with tall buildings, which is, what PBSA and BTR in particular tend to be. So how do you do that? How do you run as efficiently as possible with a relatively small physical footprint? So yeah, lots to run at, but certainly some concerns over what's going to happen with the NOI. And I mean, all of those were different topics, but they all do point to the same thing. What looks really, realistically relatively stable on paper, or certainly may have lined up maybe a year or two ago, could be very different to what's happening underneath and within the property, but also within the wider context of what's happening in the world at the moment. So it feels like the markets, a lot of them have shifted, and some of those investments, I don't think the viability is there for some of them as it was previously. But that also creates opportunity in other locations, in other places, in other sectors. And I do think that there is still plenty of opportunity out there to be getting those returns that ultimately that we have become used to. But those opportunities are going to be fewer and further between. And on that bombshell, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. We're going to take a break for Easter, and we'll have more news, views and insight from the rented shared living sectors for you then. We're extending the season into April and May to include a lavender special, a segment from Howden, and our 100th episode special as well. So please do follow and subscribe to Housed so you don't miss any of those episodes. And it would also be great if you could use the break over Easter to catch up on any missed episodes. We have nearly 100 now. So please do subscribe, leave us a review. Have a great Easter, and we'll see you soon.